There's a lot of talk these days about Brexit and borders, new Irish borders and new European borders. Well, these borders have come and gone for thousands and thousands of years, and the one on the Irish border will disappear eventually as well. There's only one real border in Ireland that's always been here, and that's the Iapetus suture, and it's been here long before we ever got here. In fact, it's about 400 million years old, and it runs all the way from Drogheda on the east coast, right across Ireland to the mouth of the Shannon and the Atlantic Ocean on the west coast. The story of Ireland actually really begins somewhere around 450 million years ago, and not around here, but in the great southern oceans way far south of the equator. And back then, the north of Ireland and the south of Ireland were separated by a massive ocean, the Iapetus Ocean. And it's over the space of about 50 million years that the two sides of Ireland slowly started to close in together, finally closing together about 400 million years ago to create what we know today as the Iapetus suture. And on top of the hill of Lloyd here, just outside Kells, there's probably no better place in Ireland to reimagine what went down all that time ago. Now, this period around 400 million years ago was known as the Caledonian period. And that's when these two giant land masses were forced together to create giant mountain ranges on either side of the unification point. And that's why you have the Caledonian mountains in Scotland, and also the Caledonian period mountains in the north of Ireland too. And the centre of Ireland mountain ranges were created as well. But over the next 50-60 million years, Mother Nature went to work on them, eroding them down through the weather and through water and through all sorts of processes. So by about 350 million years ago, the mountain ranges that had been created here had disappeared. And even more interestingly, about this time Ireland disappeared below the waves, and that's when sea levels had rose. And that's when the bedrock of Ireland, most of the bedrock in Ireland is limestone, that's when this was formed. So all these sea creatures swimming around the Earth's oceans, when they died and decayed, and all the materials in the oceans slowly sank to the bottom of the sea, and water pressure compressed them to form the deep limestone bases around these parts here today. Around the same time, the Earth's crust was slowly pulling apart and pushing together, allowing mineralized fluids to push up through this limestone bedrock to create the lead and the zinc that we have today in Tara mines in Navan, a great wealth for this part of the country. And also a little bit later after that, as Ireland rose above the waves around the equator, around 250 million years ago, these materials were exposed to the Earth's atmosphere. And the gypsum mines in Kingscourt were formed around this time, the sulphur-rich carbon reacting with the Earth's atmosphere to create these vast reserves today now held in Kingscourt. Now, about 200 million years ago, we were moving steadily along. We'd passed the equator, heading towards where we are now. And we had the dinosaurs around here too as well. They walked these lands, they swam in the oceans around Ireland too. Maybe not the biggest guys, T-Rex and those as well. This wasn't the best place to be because over different periods of time, we were rising and falling below the sea. So by about 200 million years ago, the heaviest lifting had been done. But the landscape we see today was absolutely nothing in comparison to back then, and a lot of the dressing had to be done. And we can number several ice ages from that time onwards, and with each ice age the ice and the glaciers would force everything in their path up and away and erode everything to leave nothing but base rock. The last ice age maximum was about 22,000 years ago, when most of Ireland, apart perhaps from a small piece in Munster, was covered completely with ice. And when these glaciers moved forward from the north, moving southwards, they eroded everything in their path, including creating the Blackwater Valley that we know today. These giant glaciers full with rocks and all sorts of other materials scooped out Loch Ramor and scooped out the Blackwater River Valley as far as Carnaross and created a river channel there. So when the ice began to melt, this river channel quickly filled to create the Blackwater River Valley today. But when the ice melted, it did something much more important as well. All the materials that have been collected up into this ice, which may have been up to a mile high where we stand here around Kells, when this ice melted, everything within the ice was deposited where it was. And this is where we got our soil today. The deep limestone bedrock was covered by 6 to 8 to 10 metres of rich soil which had been forced down this direction from the north of Ireland by these glaciers to give us a beautiful rich soil we have today. But by the time the ice melted, what did we have? We had nothing but soil. So what happened after that? Well, about 12,000 years ago, by the time the ice had finally melted, this looked like northern Scandinavia. It was a kind of a tundra system where you had snow most of the year round on the ground and a frozen layer of soil, which meant nothing could really grow for very long. Well, once the temperature started to rise about 10,000 years ago, this dramatically changed, and within a few hundred years this entire countryside and most of Ireland was covered in trees from one end of Ireland to the other, dense forests. Now, our local inhabitants had reached here by then. There was people hunting around Kells around 11,000 years ago, hunting the great giant elk. Now, the giant elk disappeared as the forest grew. The big antlers, they couldn't really move around these forested areas. But the people themselves settled as hunter-gatherers and moved through these forests for a couple of thousand years, happily living quietly and peacefully with plenty of natural resources to get on with. But then about 6,000 years ago, in the early Neolithic, we got a new set of Irish citizens. These were the farmers who had come from Eastern Europe into Central Europe and Southern Europe towards Britain and Ireland, and when they arrived, that meant the end for the trees. Vast swathes of forests were cut down to create the beautiful agricultural lands we know today, and they've been with us for the last 6,000 years, and we're dependent on these soils and always have been dependent on these soils for the welfare of Ireland and its agricultural economy.